is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Happy 4th of July weekend. I hope you're celebrating somewhere and writing about it. We begin with David Page, a retired school administrator. He got the opportunity to act in a play back in 1972. That inspired him to write and produce more than a dozen plays for amateur and professional theater. Through that experience, he met an individual who became a lifelong teacher, mentor, and friend, and is the subject of his first book entitled Another Man's Shoes.
It is about my 40-year-long relationship with a quadriplegic strapped to a wheelchair ever since he was 22 years old. His life was very, very small, and it was in contrast to my life. I'm married with children and 8 grandchildren, and I speak nationally and perform all over the country. I hike all over the world. So my life was very noisy and big and loud, and his life was quiet and small. And the contrast between the two personalities was so defined that I thought this has to be written about. I never had a brother, and this man never had a brother. Yet, through the 40 years of our friendship, we found the brother in each other. I met his sister in that first production of Spoon River that I was in 1972. She had said to me, you ought to meet my brother. And I went with her to California one time, met him, and we hit it off. And so even after his sister passed away, we remained best friends and always in communication. He was very much the sailor's voice. He also was a person who had a background of a lot of hurt and pain. A mother who had been an alcoholic and a father who died of early Alzheimer's. I wrote it because he passed away in 2017. Then soon after that, COVID hit, which made me unable to do the worldwide things I'd been doing. I just became kind of closed in. And in that silence, I began to realize what Gordon had brought to me. For all those years, my job was to go out into the world and experience things, see things, taste things, and bring those stories back to him. And I didn't realize it, that really what was happening in reverse was that he was teaching me how to get the most out of silence. I brought him the noise and he brought me silence. And in that silence, I wrote this book.
What's your favorite story about this man?
Well, the one that makes me laugh, when Gordon was learning how to operate an electric wheelchair, and he had been dying to get some motion in his life. And when they finally had him strapped into this thing and taught him how to use the buttons to make it go forward and backwards and left and right, whatever, he got out there, and in his excitement, he lost control of the thing and went up over curbs and into things, and he ended up on his side. He didn't get injured, but a little bit scraped. I remember when they put him back on his wheels, he turned around and he faced me and he said, "Oh my God, I have so much to learn." And that statement has stuck with me for my own life. Because there's not a day that goes by that I don't think, oh my God, I have so much to learn.
And you really gave this man a gift by sharing his life.
Yes. What I have been doing is I put together a group of actors, since I was involved in theater for so long, and I took some of the stories out of the book, and I have been publicizing these events, to come and not just listen to somebody talk about their book, but listen to the stories, the actors, as they perform sections of this book. And people are coming in and leaving with a book they purchased. Newspapers have been picking up this and running with it. I have had 6 different newspaper articles done, and front page. I can't believe how wonderfully this book is being received in the area. I have had 3 book events now that have been very well attended, like hundreds of people. So already the book has gotten out there, and the people that have bought the book have recommended it to other people. And now I've gotten, no, this is crazy, but texts from people from Australia, New Zealand, China. I don't know how this is happening.
It's great to hear that it is happening, David, because it gives other writers hope that it can happen to them too. Thank you so much. R.H. Kramer works for the Red Cross in the Detroit area, where she met the man of her dreams who inspired her book, In His Arms.
Like, I know this sounds very corny, but the way that he loves me made me want to like
Aww.
others, but not necessarily my own story, just, so a lot of the stories that I write have, things that he's done. It has pieces of me. So the story that I most recently published was actually the book that I wrote in 2015. And I held it really close to me because it was, about a young African American girl and a young Caucasian boy, and they're both in college. And I wanted to go back to the 80s so it could be a simpler time, before texting and before emails. I wanted to be that good, clean romance that I think is missing from a lot of today's adults and relationships. So I definitely went down the road of, making it before all the technology noise, and just a very clean relationship where it's a love story. I mean, it's a beautiful love story in the middle of a city between people from different racial backgrounds. He has very strong faith, very strong family ties, and he builds her faith through his devotion. And she also has very strong family ties. So it's a really great love story. I love it.
Well, tragedy strikes, right? So
Oh, yes.
what happens?
As a person who's in a, interracial relationship, you see that there are people who just don't agree with it. And what happens is she finds herself in harm's way. She's working for a bad man, and he's doing some illegal stuff, and she unfortunately becomes a witness to it when she makes a mistake. And bad people do bad things, so he turns his aggression on her. And luckily, in the attack, she witnesses a death, which she had never done before, and he bangs her head against the wall a few times, so he creates some physical trauma also, and in addition to the emotional trauma. So luckily, her knight in shining armor wasn't far, so when she comes back to consciousness, he's saving her.
But it turns out the guy she was working with was a bigot, and he didn't approve of interracial relationships.
Nope, he did not. He did not, and he voiced it to her, and it was her first time actually dealing with that kind of a thing. Because, like I said, she's young in college, so until you experience it, it doesn't.
Yeah, you don't know how cruel people can be.
Yeah, for the most ridiculous reasons, really for no reason. So from the attack, she has a little bit of, I mean, you can say PTSD, but anxiety, PTSD from all that she went through that day. And he's very patient. He's just growing through it with her, and they grow closer and closer together. And overall, it's a love story that I want to put a lot of the focus on, that just very pure, very patient love, because everybody's in such a rush these days. And it's a great story. I didn't even want to let it go for a long time. I actually released 3 stories before I released this one, because I didn't want to, I wasn't ready to let it go.
Oh, so is there a follow-up to this story?
Yes, there is. Follow-up, which is Take My Hand, and I'm hoping to have that released by the end of the year. So I have Instagram, I have Facebook, I have Twitter, I have business cards. I have a website also. And the website I mentioned in the back of the book, so people can keep up with what I'm doing next, where I'm going to be,
All right, good idea, R.H. Kramer. Looking forward to that next book. Thanks. Kevin Kelly, Kevin McDermott, and Lieutenant General John F. Mulholland, U.S. Army retired, all contributed to our next book, Paragraph 3, Conversations about Prepared Leadership in the Age of Perpetual Uncertainty from the C-Suite to the Battlefield. And Kevin Kelly is here to talk about how the three of you ended up writing this book.
Well, we ended up writing the book as General Mulholland and I were giving speeches actually in New York 3 years ago now. When I met him, we kept in touch, and I talked to CEOs and execs all the time. I run a cybersecurity business. Before that, I was CEO of a company called Heidrick and Struggles. And so during this time, I was talking to a lot of CEOs and executives right after COVID hit. I think it was June or July of 2020. And there's a lot of lack of decision making at senior echelons of organizations. And I was kind of getting frustrated because, we couldn't get anything done. And a lot of CEOs and execs are talking about, the stagnation in terms of the uncertainty and of what's happening in the world. So long story short, I said to the general, it'd be great to get, some thoughts and people who have dealt with uncertainty, from a military standpoint and from an executive or C-level standpoint, and compare and contrast that. And that's how we ended up with Paragraph 3. So General Mulholland went into, he was the first one into Afghanistan after 9/11. In the military, you get orders, and they're usually 5 paragraphs, basically the who, what, when, where, and why of what you're going to do. He was, running the 5th Mountain Division, and he was the first one. His movie came out 3 years ago. It was called Horse Soldiers.
Okay.
Where they're riding horseback in Afghanistan. It's called 12 Strong. So when he went in and he was given his orders, he had basically the mission. Paragraph 3, which we named the book after, is the execution part. And because we had never been to Afghanistan before as a country, nor had we fought a war over in that part of the world in Afghanistan, in the terrain that they had, when he received his orders, Paragraph 3 was basically blank. So he was like, great, I'm going to a new country with these soldiers, and I don't really have a roadmap or any instructions or any execution plans. It was very minimal, to say the least. And so when we faced this pandemic and all of the uncertainty and a number of things that hit us at the same time, we decided to call it Paragraph 3 for that reason, which resonates with a lot of people in the military and not in the military. So,
as you also note in the title, it's from the C-suite to the battlefield. So this information is for people running big companies.
Yeah, we have 10 CEOs and 10 major military figures that you would probably know their names. And that's what we did. We basically compared and contrast, for example, whether it's Stan McChrystal or Nadia West, who now is the first Black or African-American female to graduate from West Point. She was the Surgeon General of the United States Army at one point in time. So how she dealt with certain things in leadership, or McChrystal or McCraven, who's famous for writing, the Make Your Bed speech at Texas. So there's a lot on the military side, and then it comes to individuals such as Dr. Friedman, who's one of the top global oncologists for glioblastoma, who's at Duke University, and how they dealt with it from a medical standpoint. Dee Smith, who runs the NFLPA, which is the player side of the NFL, and how he had to deal with the uncertainty of COVID because the owners just wanted to make money. They didn't really care about the health ramifications. Those are my words. A lot of it had to do with health issues and risk for his players, what they were going to do for the Super Bowl, et cetera. So there was a lot around that. Orlando Ashford, who ran a cruise line during that pandemic, and he had to figure out how to get the ships back from Asia to the United States when there was a COVID outbreak in one of the ships early on. So that is what we covered from the military, as you just pointed out, Alice, from the C-suite to the battlefield. And I guess the main point is prepared leadership. A lot of times, I was CEO of a public company before myself and CEO of a company now. And a lot of times when you deal with an issue, it's 1 or 2 at a time, not an abundance of 3, 4, 5 issues. And so how are you prepared? It's not another leadership book. It's these individuals talking about having the right foundation in place. So when these things arise, you can take them head on, because there was a lot of uncertainty. There were a lot of, they call it in the military, people stuck on the X, and you lose lives that way if you don't make a decision, good, bad, or neutral. So that's basically the premise of the book.
All right, prepared leadership. We certainly can't have too much of that. Thanks, Kevin. Gardening and writing. That's what Jessica Prophet did to keep her sanity during COVID while she finished up homeschooling for high school. She also created a character for a Dungeons and Dragons group she was in that ultimately turned into her first published book. It's entitled Dusk of Demons.
Then I just decided to create a background for him and just kind of ran with it. And I started writing. And before I knew it, I had like 2.5 or 3 chapters done. Friend of mine at the time had kind of dragged me into the group, and I was like, okay then. A surprisingly large amount of my characters were inspired by D&D characters I had made. Plotline is actually kind of everywhere because I did most of my writing at 3 in the morning, because this was actually kind of just, it was actually a vent, a way to release stress, I would say, because at the time there was a lot of really, really bad stuff going on in my life, and I found a constructed way to get all of that out, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, that's so many writers say that, it's how they deal with all kinds of stress. So you have a 17-year-old character named
Shiki. The name is Japanese and it means king or ruler, and I thought it was kind of fitting for his character, because he does end up becoming a king or ruler in a sense at the end of the story. He lives in a world that has a story that I would kind of like compare to is kind of like X-Men. He lives in a world where there are just so many people in hiding that are not human. They have super speed, super strength, abilities of some kind, but they just blend in with the human populace. Except the majority of them decide to do whatever they please, like kingpins, mafia bosses, all sorts of stuff like that. And Shiki and his partner or familiar try and get rid of it because what hero doesn't have a purpose in life, I guess.
Well, they are demon hunters, right?
Yes.
They're going to rid the world of rapists, murderers, the scum of the earth.
Yep.
So what kind of situations do they get involved in?
There are a lot of different things. There are Shiki almost dies, family troubles. I'd like to think that the stuff that happens to them is actually kind of down to earth, even though it probably isn't. But the reason that I wrote this mainly, other than just a constructive way to get my anger out, was to show young adults all over the world that you need to think so far out of the box that you can't see the box anymore. Because that's really the fun part about writing. Just take a story and run with it.
Well, you also have a twist in this story, right? I mean, what's with the sister that he never knew?
The strongest of all of the quote unquote demons are born as twins. Well, whether or not they get split up or stay together depends on the very chaotic balance of their world. So the main character was kept in the dark the entire time. And then when he was finally brought to light, he's like, well, it's time to get all of this straight. And that's kind of where the story takes off, in my opinion.
All right. And how are you telling people about this?
I do have a book signing set up at my hometown, and I'm also in a whole bunch of Discord servers, an online platform where people from all over the world can get together and just talk on any type of subject, whether it be about one of their favorite celebrities, writing, that I'm like, hey, I'm a young author.
Yeah, I'm over here. Good to know, Jessica. Thanks so much. Thomas Stevens works for Amtrak, but he's also a comic who tried to start his own show and in the process came up with the idea for a children's book. It's entitled Fluffy.
So I thought I would invent my own show called Laughs and Fun. That's what my email is, Laughs and Fun. So I started writing all these skits. And I thought it'd be funny, this little white poodle that rode a skateboard that fought crime. So I named him Fluffy. And everybody thought it was stupid, so I just put him away. And when Kobe Bryant and those guys were coming out with all these children's books, I was like, man, if I can write a children's book, I know I can. I wrote comedy for 7 years, So I went through my desk drawer and I found Fluffy, and I was like, man, this is probably my best avenue because kids like dogs and, skateboarding. And then I made it more inclusive and diverse with all the characters I have in there. And before I knew it, I had a script. I put a pen to a piece of paper and kept writing, and it flowed. And there was a mixed race family that moved into a neighborhood, and they had a mixed race kid, black father, white mother. His name was Christian, and he didn't have any friends. They just moved there. So they bought him a little white poodle, and he named him Fluffy. Well, Fluffy always looked out the window watching everything go on. And one day somebody left a window open, he got out and he got lost. And before he knew it, he didn't know where he was. And a group of skateboarders came by and said, "Hey, what's your name, buddy?" And they saw his tag. They said, "Oh, your name's Fluffy." Like, "Hey, until we can find your family, you can come hang out with us." And right then that the dog catcher showed up, said, "Hey, I need that dog." They're like, "Well, not today." They skate off. They're like, "Listen, if you're going to hang out with us, you have to learn how to skateboard." And they punked him out. They gave him a purple mohawk, the bandana, the earring. And before you knew it, he knew how to skate. And he's part of the crew. And they would skate all over town. At the end of the story, we're skating through town one day, and there's a house fire. And Fluffy took off and ran up to the house, barking. And the family comes running out. And it turned out to be the family he came from. They're like, "Hey, I think that's my dog." And I'm like, "Yeah." So now he's back home. The kid Christian has friends, and that's the end of the story. But, there's more involved in that, but that's the basic of it.
Well, are there going to be more Fluffy stories?
Oh, well, I've already written that's the second book. I'm just pushing the first book. I'm actually got somebody doing the animation now, so I can push it towards Netflix, Nickelodeon, and Disney to sell it to them, to make it a TV show, make it a kid show. Now it's getting nice out. I'm starting going to these skate parks, and I donated 15 books to these children cancer hospitals. I've already got 3 letters back from them. I donate books to these people. I work with the general public, so I push the book that way. But I have stickers and T-shirts I'm doing now. But you know what? The ultimate goal is not necessarily to sell books. It's to make it a kid show, because I have a young black lesbian girl. I have a kid from El Salvador. I got the Irish kid named Patty. He's from Southeast Boston. I got the white California kid with the blonde hair. So it's very diverse. It's very inclusive. So, those are the characters in the first book. But the second book is where it identifies every person and where they came from. Then at the end of the second book, Fluffy meets a girlfriend. She skates up. Her name is Fifi. So then it goes into the next story. See what I mean? So yeah. So we're going to have puppies eventually, and yeah.
Move over, Clifford.
I'm telling you, man, Fluffy's going to take over the world one day.
That's the spirit, Thomas. Thanks. Francois Jean Paul used to drive a yellow cab in New York City. Then Uber came in, and for a lot of cabbies, that was the end of the story. For Francois, it was the beginning of his book entitled American Republican Drivers, a New York City yellow taxi driver's analysis through an overview of American political socioeconomic practices series, Tome 1.
You see, I was born in Haiti, okay? I came up here about 4 decades ago, and I spent about 30 years driving a yellow cab in the city of New York. As I started, I realized that there were certain kinds of mistreatment being applied to people doing that sort of work. And I probably would have found other things to do, but I decided that I should stay, watching all sorts of abuses, socially, politically. Say, for example, you go to the court, the moment that the judge has identified you as a New York City yellow cab driver, you're always guilty. So the driver always has to pay. This is as a result of lack of justice provision to them, because they had allowed those courts, and the Taxi and Limousine Commission, after a certain time, had started its own court. So the city council allowed that, and they had the Taxi and Limousine Commission court for a very long time until they changed it to something else to provide that sort of justice. Even through that, it became even worse, because now if somebody decided that, hey, that driver has done something to me, okay, so then they could just call the Taxi and Limousine Commission, okay, write a complaint, and then the Taxi and Limousine Commission would write a summons to the driver. And then They would give you a court date. On the court date, the person who made the complaint against the driver would not even have to be there.
What kind of a complaint are we talking about?
Oh, they could say you would, or you failed, to help them on time. But then you see, I'm not taking it against the customer. Okay, I'm taking it against the failure of the system to provide us justice. Because if they said, okay, listen, this person is serving you, this person is helping you, and that if you have a complaint, then it's got to be a face-to-face hearing. So then you're gonna be there and defend yourself, prove your complaint so he can defend himself. But when you say, hey, the person could be from far away, and anybody else could be talking on the phone saying that was the driver that did this to me, and then the driver doesn't even know the person's name, the person's address, who the person really is, except that they say somebody made a complaint against you. Or sometimes they could give you the name of the person.
Is it about how the TLC handled those complaints?
It is about how the TLC handles those complaints and how the TLC, uses its own inspectors also in the city, throughout the city, okay, to generate income. They could just stop you somewhere and say that you made some violation, which was not true, okay? And then even, if you got tired of that, and then you would try to say, oh, you know what, I think this is too much. I'm going to have to get some help from some higher authority by writing a letter. They would disregard that, okay? And it got very bad. So I got to a point where I decided that, you know what, it is time that people know about it. So what I really want, okay, is to have the system reshaped. So those in charge, okay, of the justice system here, okay, start feeling that, hey, you know what, if we don't do things to their favor, we may not be reelected. And once they have it like this, then you're going to see a change.
All right, Francois, you're going to have to be patient. As they say, the wheels of justice turn slowly. All right, that's it for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. If you want to find out more about the authors and their books, just go to pagepublishing.com. I think we had some great takeaways on this show. Our first author talked about how he turned portions of his book into small plays, and he invited people to come and see them, and he's been pretty successful with that. And our teen author, she talked about Discord servers. Google that if you want to find a group where you can talk about your book. We're always asking authors how they promote their book so we can pass that information on to you. All right, I got to run. Thanks for joining us. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini.